everyone. We already know that, especially for the English students, figures of speech are very important, right? Its meaning, its definition. So let's get started. Hello everyone, I'm Neelam from Poonam Academy. Now let's start with a figure of speech. So basically, a figure of speech is a phrase or word used in non-literal sense of rhetorical or rich effect, right? So basically, I can say that it is an expression that is different from its literal meaning, right? It makes sense, right? So a figure of speech is a way of describing something, or I can say that someone interestingly and vividly, right? So the words or phrases may not mean exactly what they suggest, but they paint a clear picture in the mind of the reader, right? Or I can say listener, right? So a figure of speech can be in the form of a phrase or a single word. So the figures of speech are also known as rhetorical, right? Or I can say rhetorical figures, right? So figure of speech is easier to understand than an idiom, as you do not have to be familiar with the language to decipher it, right? So every language has its figures of speech, and I can say idioms that are own to that language, right? I hope it's clear to you. So they are used to make writing more interesting, right? So basically, figures of speech are used to make the writing interesting. So there are many types of figures of speech in the English language, but we are going to learn the most common types, right? We can learn the most common types in this video, right? So I can say that all types of figure of speech list. So first one is alliteration. Alliteration is a figure of speech in which two usually consecutive words begin with the same consonant sound but not always the same letter, right? So the word doesn't always have to be next right to each other, but when you say or read them, the sound is repeated, or we can say repetition of sound. For example, 4 fabulous fish and go and gather the flowers on the grass. So alliteration helps us to make what we say or write more interesting to listen to or read. Writers and poets use alliteration to make their writing memorable and fun to read. So there are some famous phrases. For example, alliteration examples: cold coffee, happy Harry, Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. It's a phrase, right? She sells seashells on the seashore. Becky's beagle barked and bayed which bothered Billy. Donald Duck. Jackrabbits jump and jiggle jauntily. So there are many more you will see, and many new ones you can make up as you do the practice of alliteration, right? Next one is metaphor. So we use metaphor all the time. Suppose when your mummy says this house is a zoo, she doesn't mean that it is the place where animal lives. She just means that everyone in the house is as noisy as a bunch of animals would be, right? So she is using the zoo as a metaphor for the house, and she is describing the house as if were a zoo to make the comparison clear. So it's a great fun to use metaphors because they make what we say more colorful and people can understand what we are trying to tell them better. For example, look at this list of metaphors and what they mean. It will get you started. Dirty pig, very filthy. Having two-legged feet, very bad dancer. To get cold feet, to become nervous, right? To be an early bird, meaning to reach first or earliest. Pearls of wisdom mean wise words, right? So next is personification. So personification is giving human qualities to something that may not be human or even alive, right? For example, when you say the flowers nodded their head cheerfully. So what you mean here is that flowers moved about in the wind looking as if they were cheerful and happy. You are imagining that the flowers have human emotions, right? Personification examples: laughing flowers, falling wind, smiling sun, opportunity knocking at the door, shoe bite, right? Next is onomatopoeia. So this is a very big word that just means words that imitate sounds. For example, Peter Patter is an example of onomatopoeia, right? So it mimics the sound of rain or maybe little feet. So the word tinkle is also onomatopoeia. It mimics the sound of bell of falling water. So we use onomatopoeia all the time in our everyday speech. Poets and writers use this figure of speech to make their writings more expressive too. For example, zoom, beep, grow, right? Boom, focus on sound. Click, clip clop, ding dong, right? Next figure of speech is similes. So what is a simile? A simile is a figure of speech in which two things are directly compared. We use the word like or as to make the comparison, right? For example, as dark as the night, as cool as a cucumber, fought like cats and dogs, eat like a horse. So the four phrases above are all similes. The beauty of a simile is that it helps us imagine clearly what the writer is trying to say. Poets and writers use similes to make their writing come alive. Similes examples: as blind as a bat, as bold as brass, as bright as a button, as black as coal, as clear as crystal, as cold as ice, as cool as a cucumber. Next is oxymoron. So an oxymoron brings two conflicting ideas together. We use them to draw attention from the reader or listener, right? Two words with apparently contradictory meanings are combined to form a new word that is more in conjunctions. For example, alone together, deafening silence, bittersweet, living dead. Next figure of speech is hyperbole, right? Hyperbole means using exaggerated statements for effect. The media and politicians often use hyperbole to make theatricals or speeches more attentive or attention-grabbing, or seem more important, bigger, better, and more interesting. So let's have a look to the example. I have told you a million times not to get your shoes dirty. John's mom always cooks enough food to feed an army. What have you got in this suitcase to weigh a ton? I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Right? Next is cliche. So this is when a phrase is overused and loses impact and lack original thought. Using a cliche can be seen as old-fashioned or even a sign of poor writing, as their expressions have been used too often and no longer relevant or interesting. Let's have a look. For example, a woman's place is in the kitchen, and they all lived happily ever after. All that glitter is not gold. All is fair in love and war. Next figure of speech is repetition. Repetition is when a word or phrase is repeated for effect or emphasis. Teachers often teach things like timetables by repetition, and musicians repeated their songs. A good example, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Repetition example means I'm telling you I won't do it. I simply won't do it. Next is let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Next is he told me about it years and years and years ago. Home sweet home. Next is rhetorical questions. So basically this type of question doesn't require an answer, as it has been phrased in a way that assumes the reader or listener knows the answer. Public speakers and politicians use rhetorical questions for dramatic effect or get a point across, and not because they expect an answer. The answer is usually obvious, or they think it is. Rhetorical question examples: can pigs fly? Is the Pope a Catholic? Is this supposed to be some kind of joke? We don't need any more failure, do we? Now next figure of speech is three-part list, means rule of three. So these are commonly used in advertising and speeches to grab attention and give emphasis. 3 parts seems more comprehensive and more knowledgeable than 2, it seems. 3-part list example: snap, crackle, and pop. I came, I saw, I conquered. Right? And I put my blood, sweat, and tears into that project. Hear all, see all, say now. Right? Noun means nothing. Next figure of speech is rhyme. This is most important. This is when words have a similar ending sound. It is usually seen most often in poetry and song lyrics, but it is in advertising and public speeches the rhyming words stand out. For example, trying before you buy. 7-Eleven. Birds of a feather stick together. Kids and grown-ups love it so. The happy world of Haribo. Next figure of speech is euphemism, right? It is an indirect or innocuous word or phrase used instead of something considered unpleasant, harsh, or sensitive or embarrassing. It is often intended to amuse or downplay something that the speaker deems offensive or upsetting somehow. They may be used to cover profanity or sensitive subjects such as gender, disability, and death in a very polite manner. For example, friendly fire, attack from allied forces. He is telling us a tall story, meaning a lie. Senior citizen, old person. Staff restructure, meaning making people redundant, right? Next figure of speech is liturgies. Liturgies is an understatement, usually involving a hint of irony. Instead of saying something simple or obvious, a phrase contrary to the truth is used. For example, it's hardly rocket science, is it? Often said when a task is very simple. The weather isn't so good today. It usually said during thunderstorm. She is no spring chicken, meaning someone is not young. He is not exactly a beggar. He is financially solvent, right? Next is circumlocution, right? So circumlocution, also called circumjunction, right? It's just the unnecessary use of many words when fewer would be more appropriate. An idea or subject is circled, chalked around, or avoided altogether instead of directly referring it. For example, I work 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays. It means I work part-time, right? Next example is, he resides in a refurbished Victorian establishment on the edge of a town. Means he lived in a terrace house, right? Next is our Lord in heaven, the Holy Father, God. The vehicle that I own is a fabulous shade of metallic dark turquoise. Means my car is blue. Next figure of speech is tautology. It is saying the same thing twice using different words. It is a way of adding emphasis or clarity, but can come across as being unnecessarily wordy, right? For example, Sally told everyone with pride that she has made the handsome sweater herself. The kids always take turns to answer the questions one after the other. She is in the middle of reading Michelle Obama's autobiography about her life story. They climb up to the top of Kilimanjaro all the way to the summit. Next figure of speech is pun. So pun is a play on words, as it is usually a jokey way of exploiting the fact that some words sound alike or have more than one meaning or spelling that rely heavily on homophones and homonyms to work. For example, the chicken farmer's favorite car is who, right? He has been to see his dentist so many times now that he knows the drill. I have forgotten where my wife said we were going, don't worry, Alaska. The cyclist has 2 tires to win the race. Next is epigram. An epigram is a clever, witty or satirical phrase or line of poetry. So it is usually expresses an ingenious, paradoxical, memorable or amusing idea. For example, I can resist everything but temptation, right? There is only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about, right? Winners never quit and quitters never win. For most of history, Anonymous was a woman, right? Climax. Next figure of speech is climax. This is from the Greek word climax, meaning staircase or ladder. In narrative, the words or clauses are arranged to build tension or drama to a peak, means main part of the story, and get the undivided attention of the audience. So reader is mentally preparing for the climax of the story as the conflict or tension rises and finally reaches resolution. Most films, books, plays, anecdotes have conflict drama which reaches a climax, then resolved by the end of the narrative. Examples: Titanic. Think of the rising tension as the ship hits the iceberg and it starts to sink. The water everywhere, people screaming, running, try to save themselves or find family members. The intrigue builds until finally the ship slips before the surface and there is a shock of disbelief at the set. A sorry survivor is left floating above. Martin Luther King, his "I have a dream" speech builds in tension and reaches this climax. A promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, right? Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet has many plot twists and rising tensions in the form of family conflicts, love, murder and usually death. Next important figure of speech is irony, a subtle form of humor involving words opposing to what is actually meant. Irony can fall into three categories. First one is verbal irony, saying one thing and meaning something else, usually the opposite of what is said. For example, saying that you couldn't possibly eat another thing than reaching for some more cake. Next is dramatic irony. This is when the audience is more aware of the plot line than the characters. For example, in Shakespeare's Macbeth, while Duncan thinks Macbeth is faithful to him, so Macbeth is actually plotting to murder him. The audience knows this, but Duncan doesn't. Third is situational irony. This is when something happens that is completely contrary to what is expected, right? So often with an element of shock or surprise. For example, winning the lottery and dying the day after. Listen to Ironic by Alanis Morissette for many more examples. Next is antithesis. So this is the exact opposite of something, or when two things contrast greatly, right? For example, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Who said this? Neelam song in 1969. Many are called but few are chosen. Matthew. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Next is assonance. So basically assonance is a repetition of the same vowel sounds in a phrase or sentence. Assonance example, we receive 3 emails each week, right? The rain in Spain stays mainly on the plain. From the musical My Fair Lady. Hear the mellow wedding bells. The bells, Edgar Allan Poe. Next figure of speech is consonance. So consonance is the repetition of the same consonant sound in a phrase or sentence, right? Consonance examples, the rain pitter-pattered in the puddle, right? The cook cooked cutest cupcakes. Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers. Next figure of speech is anastrophe. Anastrophe is a deliberate change of normal word order for emphasis, right? For example, the greatest teacher failure is, right? Yoda Star Wars. Into the lake the jeep drove. Next one swallow a summer does not make, right? So these are the important figures of speech, and I think these figures of speech are very, very helpful to those who are in 11th class, who are in 12th class, especially in 9th class and 10th class. So I think you like this, right? One more is analogy, a way of comparing things based on the ways they are similar, and this is to show the similarity without explaining. For example, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know that you are going to get. Where it is taken from? From Forrest Gump. He is strong as an ox. She is as white as a mouse. Right? Next figure of speech is paradox. Paradox is a statement containing two opposing facts that seems impossible, contradictory or absurd but might turn out to be true. Right? For example, I must be cruel only to be kind. Hamlet by Shakespeare. Right? Nobody goes to the seaside at the weekend because it's too crowded. Youth is wasted on the young. Right? So, I think you like this lecture, and if you like this lecture, if you like this video, then please subscribe to my channel and share this video with your friends and colleagues and those who are giving the competitive exams, those who are in 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th class. This video is very helpful for the basically literary devices which are used in English literature part, right? So if you like my content, then please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon to receive more updates, more videos, and share this video with your friends and colleagues. I hope you like this video. Thank you.